a child. It's time you found your faith again.
So yeah, I was gonna do a video on the anti-MRA stance, third wave feminism, that kind of thing, after watching the Red Pill movie, and just getting some news this week with my family law court case that is just another example of me slipping through the cracks and having no rights, thinking of MRA, men's rights, and I felt like, how could I talk about MRA or anti-MRAs, the backlash and my perspective on that, without talking about rights in general. It's so important to define words, define our intentions, and just have articulate communication around all these things. Everybody's out there fighting. The polarity of just the sides and the left, right, and the Trump, anti-Trump, and the Willie Lynch syndrome is just polarity fighting. And so I'll say that before even I go into rights, is just when I look at anti-MRAs, and what I was even going to comment on around that is just still gets back to fighting and people screaming at each other, yelling over each other, not doing two ears, one mouth, not having humility and being humble. Just very little. It's such the team mentality, which is ironic because the Antifa and all that, what they're fighting it's still the same thing, team mentality and domination. As far as I'm concerned, they're all just violations of the non-aggression principle, which is why I am still I still value and am a proponent for the ongoing conversation of the non-aggression principle, just getting more discussions around what that is, how it relates to other philosophies and political stances in general. So, rights. I just think rights are an interesting topic. And for how much the word is thrown around, and especially with all the new movements, and historically, how much we view progress to have come from the assertion of individual and collective group rights. For how little I think it's actually a topic within at least my public circles of people, and I know revolutionaries and freedom fighters, and there's not a lot of defining of terms and true meeting of the mind, so that we know when we're out there allegedly fighting the other side, that we're even fighting for things that we think our team is fighting for. So when it comes to rights, I think humans tend to confuse rights with potential. I think humans have a lot of potential in the same way that we confuse positive law, man-made law, with natural law, creator's law. So there's a law that's infallible that you can't protest, right? The law of buoyancy or the law of gravity, thermodynamics. There's lots of science has shown that it doesn't care about your opinion. It doesn't care about your politics, the need for oxygen in the human body. Like, you're not going to go philosophically protest oxygenating the body as a necessity to live. You're either going to acquiesce or you're going to perish. So there's a natural law demanding that you give this vessel certain properties to even maintain a daily momentum. So in the same, you're not going to jump off a 100-story building, land on concrete, and think that the meat suit's going to survive, because there's a bunch of laws in practice that don't care about your philosophy, that still are. As Bill Hicks says,
always that same LSD story, you've all seen it. Young man on acid thought he could fly, jumped out of a building. What a tragedy. He's an idiot. If he thought he could fly, why didn't he take off on the ground first? Check it out. You don't see ducks lined up to catch elevators to fly south. They fly from the ground, you moron. Quit ruining it for everybody.
so the tragic stories of people on drugs doing something stupid and killing themselves, they're not going to defy natural law just because mentalism in their mind, they think they're Superman, or you shermed out on PCP and think you're invincible and aren't worried about bullets or cars or whatever it is. Their natural law is going to override illusion. So when it comes to rights, for example, I'm a part of Star Tribe Alliance, and one of our mission statements as a collective is that all humans have a right to clean water. And as I'm probably a minority in that, I'm one of the few people who voice an opinion around what says we have a right to clean water. Who says? And what does that look like? What does that mean? So if I have a right to clean water, it means I have a right to it. And that should look a certain way. That I should have access, and there shouldn't be anything inhibiting me. So what does it mean when you can inhibit somebody's right? Is it really a right? We're talking about inalienable, unalienable, God-given, man-made rights, the constitutional rights. Does the Constitution give you rights? Does that piece of paper protect something? And so I think there's an absolute intimate tie between rights and violence, because what we call rights, which are potentials for humans, I have the potential to be treated equal as a melanated man in America. We can claim that's a right, but what does it mean in society? What does it mean if I'm not being treated equal? What does it mean if I'm being discriminated against or hated upon just for somebody else's preferences? Do I have a right to have them not think that way? I just have the right to not be impacted by it. And I don't think that's really what the case is. I think what we mean when we say I have the right is we have the potential to organize as a people with the backing force of violence to say, if you do this thing, you will be met with retaliation. And so that's what the American police force does, right? That's what the lawyers and the judges do. They use philosophical laws and statutes under positive law, man-made law, and I would argue that most of these statutes aren't even truly man-made law in the sense that they were ratified by 2/3 government, but they're still the ordinance that direct the so-called civility of society, of the alleged citizens. And so our rights are handled now in modern society through courts, which are still backed by force. So courts have their backing by the United States police force. So if you get a warrant issued, if you're in contempt of court, or any number of things that you could be held in violation of Americans' doctrines of code of conduct, then either the sheriff or the police, one of the hired authorities, comes and physically, with threat of gun and violence to your life, forces you into acquiescence, whether that's to go to jail. They might just do a lien and financial penalty, garnish your wages or something, but criminal crimes, that's how we prosecute, by force and then through punishment. So that is how rights are exercised. They're not exercised by the hand of the Creator because natural law already exists. It's fundamental in its natural properties. So man-made law needs agreement. It needs collective backing or collective apathy where they don't put their nose in. And that's how I feel with the family courts. That's why when I got into men's rights issues, didn't come from whatever the anti-MRA thinks this is what men's rights looks like.
This is what men's rights look like. This is what men's rights look like. This is what men's rights look like. This is what men's rights look like.
Right? That kind of stuff. I don't even know what they're talking about. So I don't even know if we're engaged in a conversation of what a right is, much less what I'm trying to get awareness around when it comes to my case and the injustice that I feel I've faced, which is inequality. It's force that supports the mother in this case, which I think is predominantly the cause in American courts. That's what we consistently see, upwards of 80 to 90% of custody hearings go in favor of the mother. And if I have an equal right to parenting, then what does that mean? I get 2% of time with my daughter and I'm forced to pay. So is that equality? And does that have to do with a right? And are my rights being violated? And if they are, who cares? What does it mean? What does it mean if there's no force backing it? What does it mean if there's no public consensus that is even part of the conversation? And if they are, doesn't care. Or they do care but don't have a vehicle and a vessel to exercise a sentiment they might have into something tangible that could work to produce change. That's what we call the American legal system. And so they say, go legislate it. If you don't like what you see, you get the people organized and you legislate new laws. You vote in people that represent you. That's a discussion of itself, the electoral college and our voting process in general, local and then on the grand scale federally. So my main point is rights. I think we still need to talk about constitutional rights, unalienable rights, God-given rights. What are rights and what justifies them? And how does force play a role in that? And so when we start to get an understanding and a meeting of the minds truly about what rights are, then I guess we can discuss what men's rights are, what women's rights are, what human rights are. Are we feminists? Are we maleless? Are we humanists? Egalitarians? Is this about rights? Is it about domination? Is it about understanding each other and finding the best middle ground we can? That's why I do these videos, to try to continue the conversation, not to add to any Willie lynching, not trying to divide people anymore, not trying to have keyboard warriors just being disrespectful in the comments. I mean, it's such a sad thing to read these YouTube comments. Just people have no tact and no class and just no creative articulation really of true leaders, true teachers, true wisdom keepers, those people that are really powerful. Honestly, you think you're gonna affect change in the world and even your own self and your own body and mind and personal well-being by just being disrespectful and battling on YouTube and Facebook and social media? It's just a long conversation in general. How do rights relate to respecting people? Right? Isn't respect the beginning of the degradation of rights? You disrespect another human being, you don't care about their well-being. Because I think it all comes back to compassion. The recognition and protection of what we define as rights, our potential here, which is to try to be treated good, to have opportunity for life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and all that. So I think compassion, the love revolution, is still the main issue. Rights, I think, is a fluid term that a lot of people haven't totally defined when they're out there screaming, trying to protect it or assert their own rights. And so it's just been hard. It's been hard losing my daughter in these courts and feeling like people don't care. and like I don't have any rights. It's been hard watching people out there screaming at each other from both sides. It's not even both sides, it's the full circle, the full spectrum, 180 degrees, 360 degrees to your opposite, to the full cycle back, and just makes my heart hurt. And so I want to do a video, and I was going to do it on how it hurts to see the anti-MRAs just screaming when I feel like the basic principles of men's rights, of course I stand by. And I agree with a lot of the points. And I feel like a good human, and I would wonder why anybody would scream at me based on what I'm feeling and thinking sincerely right now. Because I feel like I'm a good man and have good intentions. And so how do we get to that point where screaming is going on and blatant disrespect and rights are being violated? We get there by losing focus and center and balance on our clarity with compassion and our connectivity with the macro, with the whole. Losing ourselves into individuality and even into groupthink, ultimately just not learning from history, not learning that where we want to go always involves intelligent, compassionate, patient, wise dialogue with a huge conglomerate of people that we're trying to co-create with on this crazy plane that we're living on. So I don't think we got any rights. That's my personal belief. I don't think rights exist. I think the concept of a right is a human concept, and it's a potential that we're striving for. But it's not inalienable, unalienable. It can be challenged. You don't have the right to life. Somebody can come shoot you right now. It's the world I live in. How does your right exist if somebody else has that opportunity? So what we do have is the means to articulate our thoughts and our desires and the greatest, grandest vision of what we want for ourselves and our family and our community and our cultures and our inner cultures and inner nations. We do our best to try to dialogue that, and you look at the world and we're really not that good at the whole thing. And so none of us should be gloating too much or screaming too boastfully when those at the top of the pyramid are some of the most violent, dysfunctional, least successful in true communion and healing mitigation that we can see. And that's why we know all the depression is spreading, and the CNNs and the Fox Newses and all the impact this is having on everybody, just seeing the constant fear-mongering and Willie lynching. That's all it is. Divide and conquer still through chaos and fear. So that's as important to me as understanding rights, understanding compassion and connectivity. Trying to stab another part of yourself and chop down roots from the other side of your tree. Banyan tree community, that's my original community. An organism that's all connected. It looks like individual trees. You can go kill one of them and just hurt yourself. So that's the freedom movement. That's the love revolution, is how can we be good to each other? How can I be a better human? How can I take self-accountability and try to contribute something to the collective that isn't just what I think is the best for them, but listens to what my surrounding community feels is the best for them as well, so that we can navigate that macro with our individual micro and try to be as harmonious as we can. I'm not into utopian doctrines, but I certainly think we can be living far better than what we're seeing right now. And yeah, it has to do with exercising rights, but we could interchange the word right with preference. This is my preference. My preference is to have big government out of my pockets, out of my way, have some acknowledgement of the land grab that happened, so that my pursuit of life and liberty and happiness can happen without being taxed just for being alive. That's slavery. So owing somebody that I don't know just to be on the earth is slavery. So my preference is that we find a way to minimize government, create harmony, which means doing that with our own family, with our own friends, our own community, having those conversations look peaceful, progressive, challenging, ongoing, right? We need to be able to talk about all this stuff with the people right here in our own backyard and have that look positive. Why don't you get your city intact? We're worrying about the world. Get your little block intact. Get your neighborhood intact so that you're on the same page. See how hard that is. Nobody's even going to city councils, you know? Like we have no city communion going. So we really got a lot of work to do on the local level, starting with self. So I don't believe I have a right or an entitlement to anything from y'all, even from Creator. Creator's gift was putting me here and allowing me this choice to do an amazing potentiality for myself and with the people around me. When we're thinking and we're inspired and we're happy and motivated and disciplined and healthy, connecting, you know what the potential of communities and humans are? We can't fathom. We can't imagine it. And we're nowhere near it. We're down here bickering, fighting like children in a sandbox, flinging poo at each other. So I don't believe I have a right to anything of yours. I don't believe you have the right to take anything of mine. Even though people are right now, we're all being taxed. And the reason we let that happen is because we're peaceful. So we try to navigate as peaceful as we can without having conflict, while many of us feel violated by other people, many of whom don't want to sit at the same table and have a conversation and hear that. And that's why violence is so attached to the exercise of preference, aka rights. Because when you don't listen to people and you push people too far, violence is inevitable. And I think as a society and a culture, we say we don't want that. So that's why I open up my ears to you, to my friends and family and the greater community. Not to be screamed at and disrespected, but to hear any position with interest and concern and sincerity, and to bring authenticity. Your thoughts alone don't threaten me. Your ideals don't threaten me. It's your actions that will impact me. Personally, I'm not worried about the racist who doesn't like blacks, or even the white nationalists who want to set up their own nation. I'm for national preservation. I don't care if nationalists want to preserve their nationhood, their cultural identity. How does that impact me? If it doesn't violate the non-aggression principle and nobody's infringing on my rights and causing injury, that's why common law is so beautiful. If you're not injuring me, what do I care what you're doing? If you're not injuring other people, then do you. I'll do me. Stay out of my business. I'll stay out of your business. And if we happen to bump into each other and co-create for means of commerce or trade or pleasure and celebration, then we do it intelligently, joyously, with a good attitude, knowing that, of course, we want to avoid conflict and war because it doesn't serve anybody. So that's my little piece on rights. I don't know if we got them. I don't know if we really have unalienable rights, God-given rights. Nobody's come to protect my rights when it comes to seeing my daughter. If I try to see my daughter, I'll be faced with the law. I'll go to jail because there's a court order saying I don't get more than 2% time. So help me understand how I got a right to see my daughter. How those rights compare to women's rights. Does it compare? Does it matter? Do we have to fight about it? Or does compassion drive the conversation that we hope to have at large? so that regardless if I'm melanated, if I'm a man, if I'm in my 40s, whatever it may be, if I'm an American, if I'm from Western, whatever it is, that we can hear any of those personal identity labels, at least with an open mind to start dialoguing before we try to dominate. So that's my piece. I give thanks for your ears. Be good to yourself. I acknowledge and celebrate you for whatever you think your demographic is. And I hope that we can have ongoing dialogues that are peaceful and intelligent and offer some tangible solutions. I'm not here to just vent and be, victim mentality. I'm always solution oriented. My solution, let's get back to round table and locally and globally, but a little more locally than globally. Let's make progress with ourselves and our family and our communities first. And then let's lead by example. When we got our communities banging and they're popping off and living harmoniously and thriving while still maintaining diversity or commonality between culture sharing, right? It's not all appropriation. Like we share cultural tendencies as well, naturally. So when we start seeing communities thriving doing that, I think then we can start to be boastful and we can do it humbly because we're truly proud. Like, look at what we did. And you see all these people getting along, they can still maintain their sovereign integrity for whatever they're trying to keep intact. Just preference, historical, bloodline, lineage, cultural preference. So I acknowledge whatever yours is, whatever you say your culture is, as long as it doesn't try to dominate mine, we can live peacefully. So let's encourage that. Here's to peaceful dialogue and a peaceful future, defining rights, preferences, and otherwise. My name's McAD. Check the music out, rhymesforthetimes.com. Be good. Peace.
It's all coming together right here now. It's all coming together right here now. It's all coming together right here. Who's that? It's love. Can you feel it coming through that? Conscious revolutionary music. Yeah.